So, when you open the Old Testament, who is the God you meet? Is it a God who commands brutal, all-out war, or is it a God who dreams of a future with no war at all? Well, the really fascinating and, let's be honest, challenging answer is both. Today, let's unpack how the same collection of sacred writings can hold these two completely opposite portraits of God.
And we have to start right here with one of the most shocking commands you'll find anywhere in the Bible. This isn't just a suggestion from some king or general. The text tells us this is a direct order from God himself given to King Saul, an order for complete and total annihilation. And believe it or not, this isn't the only time we see something like this.
To even begin to understand this, you have to get your head around the idea behind it. This wasn't just warfare for land or resources. No, this was framed as a religious duty, a concept that's often called holy war.
Okay, so there's a key Hebrew word we need to know here, kerem. It's sometimes translated as the ban, but what it really means is to devote something or someone utterly to destruction as an offering to God. Everything that fell under the ban, people, animals, property, was considered set apart for God and had to be completely wiped out.
So, how did this idea actually play out on the ground? Well, the most famous telling of this story comes from the book of Joshua, and it paints a pretty clear, if brutal, picture of one single sweeping military conquest.
The story in the book of Joshua is, well, pretty cut and dry. It describes this lightning-fast, unified military campaign, all led by this one guy, Joshua. The mission? Take the entire promised land from its inhabitants. And according to this book, they pull it off, completely.
And the language here is crystal clear. The text says Joshua followed the commands and, quote, left no survivors. Everything was put under the ban, exactly as God had commanded. This version of the story presents a mission that was perfectly and ruthlessly accomplished. A total, clean victory.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Because if you literally just turn the page from the end of Joshua to the very beginning of the next book, the book of Judges, that whole picture just falls apart. Suddenly, that clean, total victory, it feels like it never even happened.
What if the real story wasn't one quick campaign at all? What if it was actually a long, messy, and often failing struggle for survival? Because that is exactly the picture the book of Judges paints.
I mean, the contrast is just jarring. Joshua gives us one big, unified army. But Judges, it's all about scattered, individual tribes fighting their own separate battles. Joshua claims a total conquest, but Judges shows a land that is still full of other peoples. You have these two accounts sitting right next to each other, telling completely different stories. And that's likely because they were written down by different people at different times, each trying to make their own point.
Think about this. The very first lines of Judges show the Israelites asking God who should go up first to fight the Canaanites. Now, that's a really weird question to ask if you've supposedly already wiped them all out, right? It immediately throws you into a world of ongoing, unfinished business.
And the rest of the book gets locked into this pretty grim, repeating cycle. First, the people turn away from God. Then, they get conquered by their enemies. Then, they cry out for help. God sends a hero, they called him a judge, to save the day. But as soon as that judge dies, whoops, the whole cycle just starts right back up again. This is a story of constant struggle, not a clean sweep.
So let's get to the big question. Why? Why are these commands for such extreme violence in the text at all? Whether you're looking at Joshua's total war or the endless cycles in Judges, the Bible actually gives a very specific reason.
It all comes down to one thing, really: fear. A deep, profound fear of religious assimilation. The other peoples in the land, the Canaanites especially, and their gods were seen as an existential threat. The writers were terrified that if the Israelites lived alongside these other cultures, they'd inevitably be tempted to worship their gods. So this brutal command to destroy everyone and everything, it was framed as a desperate, radical test of loyalty to preserve their own religious purity.
But that is not where the story ends, not by a long shot. Because centuries later, a whole new set of voices shows up in the biblical text, the prophets. And they offer a vision that completely turns this whole idea of holy war on its head.
And here it is, one of the most famous passages in the prophetic books, and it is a total 180. The very tools of violence, swords and spears, are literally going to be hammered into tools for farming, for creating life. It's not just that war will end, it's that humanity will forget how to wage war in the first place.
I mean, think about how powerful that vision is. It's not just some ancient religious idea. Those exact words from Isaiah and Micah are carved into a wall right across the street from the United Nations headquarters in New York City, a global symbol for our deepest hopes for peace.
So what the prophets are doing here is huge. They're reframing the whole story. They're suggesting that, yes, maybe the God who commanded war was part of a specific time in the past, but the ultimate goal, the true future that God is building, is one defined by universal peace, not by conflict.
So we're left holding this incredible tension, all inside the same book. On one hand, a God of war. On the other, a God of peace. And this ancient conflict leaves us with a very modern question, one we still wrestle with all the time. How does this very same tension between the impulse for destruction and the longing for reconciliation still play out in our world today?